The child's hand closed around Anna Harper's wrist like a small, warm trap, and in that single breathless moment, everything Anna had planned, every careful step she had mapped toward the door, every whispered excuse she had rehearsed in the dark hollow of her mind, fell apart completely. She had been so close. The Walker household was quiet with the hush that came just before evening prayers, that particular stillness when the last light bled orange and red through the dusty windows of the ranch house, and the smell of supper still clung to the air. Dexter Walker had his back to her. His two older boys, Caleb and Jesse, were already kneeling beside the worn settee. The Bible lay open on the side table, and Anna, who had told herself 100 times that she was not the kind of woman who stayed, who had promised herself the moment she set her battered carpetbag down in this house 3 weeks ago that she would not get attached, had taken one careful step toward the door. Then Lily's hand found hers. Lily Walker was 4 years old, and she had her father's dark eyes, and she looked up at Anna with a trust so complete, so devastating, that Anna felt it like a blade slipping between her ribs. The little girl said nothing. She simply held on. And Anna Harper, who had survived a brutal marriage, a dangerous flight across 2 territories, and the particular cruelty of men who thought they owned women the way they owned land, could not move. She could not pull her hand free. She stood there, halfway between leaving and staying, with the child's warmth anchoring her to a floor she had no right to stand on, to a family she had no right to love, to a man she absolutely could not afford to want. And that was how it had all begun, 3 weeks and a lifetime before this moment, in a story she had never meant to be part of. Anna Harper had arrived in Coldwater Creek, Texas, on a Tuesday in early October of 1882, on a stage line that smelled of horse sweat and tobacco, and the particular desperation of people going somewhere they had never planned to go. She had a carpetbag, a fake name on the bill of fare she had purchased in Abilene, and a bruise along her left jaw that she had done her best to hide beneath the brim of a calico bonnet. She was 26 years old, which felt ancient to her now, though she knew other women her age who still believed in soft things. Anna had stopped believing in soft things somewhere around the 2nd year of her marriage to Gerald Whitmore, a cattle broker in Dodge City who had a pleasant face and a secret that revealed itself only behind closed doors. She had not killed Gerald. She wanted to be clear about that, at least in her own mind. She had simply left. In the middle of the night, in the rain, with nothing but what she could carry, and the address of a cousin in El Paso who had written her one letter 6 months ago saying there was space if she ever needed it. The problem was that Gerald had friends. Gerald had a brother who wore a badge in Barton County, and Gerald had the kind of money that made inconvenient things disappear, including inconvenient wives who fled in the rain. So Anna had not gone to El Paso. She had zigzagged across the territory like a spooked jackrabbit, changing her name once in Wichita, changing it again in Abilene, and ending up in Coldwater Creek not because she had chosen it but because the stage had stopped for a broken wheel, and by the time it was fixed she had made a decision. She would stay here. Somewhere Gerald and his brother, the lawman, would not think to look. The problem, of course, was money. Anna had $11.40, which was enough for perhaps 2 weeks at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Caldwell, and not much after that. She had spent the first day in Coldwater Creek sitting very still in her small room and taking stock of her options, which was something Gerald had never liked her doing. He had preferred her frightened and reactive. She was trying very hard to be neither. The mercantile owner, a man named Potts, told her on her 2nd day in town that there was a rancher north of town who needed a housekeeper. His wife had died of fever 8 months ago, and he had 3 young children and a cattle operation, and not enough hours in the day to manage both. Anna had listened to Mr. Potts describe Dexter Walker with the particular attention she gave to everything now, filing away details, assessing risk, calculating distance. "Good man," Mr. Potts had said, wrapping her flour in brown paper with the particular efficiency of a man who had said these same words many times. Quiet, works hard, doesn't drink more than sociable. Lost Elizabeth something fierce, but he's kept it together for those boys and that little girl of his. Fair pay, room and board, respectable situation. Couple other women looked at it, but one was from back east and didn't take to the ranch life, and the other, well, he had paused in a way that suggested a story he was not willing to tell. He's a private man, won't give you trouble. Anna had thought about it for the rest of that day and most of the night. She had thought about the $11.40. She had thought about Gerald's brother's badge. She had thought about a roof and meals, and a place where she could be invisible enough to think, to plan, to save enough money to get to El Paso or California or somewhere that felt like breathing. She had walked out to the Walker ranch the following morning. It was a working cattle operation. That much was clear from the moment she came up the long drive between the live oaks, their twisted limbs casting the kind of shade that seemed cooler than it had any right to be in October. The house was not grand, but it was solid, the kind of house a man had built with intention rather than ambition. 2 stories of good timber with a wide porch and a kitchen garden that had gone a little ragged from inattention. There were horses in the near pasture and cattle sounds from the far fields, and 3 sets of muddy boots on the porch steps, ranging from very large to very small. Dexter Walker came around the side of the house when he heard her footsteps on the gravel, and Anna had to revise her expectations almost immediately, because Mr. Potts had described him as quiet and private, and Anna had formed a picture in her mind of someone gray, someone closed down, someone easy to overlook. Dexter Walker was 32 years old, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been weathered by the Texas sun into something angular and honest. He was carrying a hammer, which he lowered when he saw her, and he looked at her the way a man looks when he is not sure what he is seeing, but is willing to take a moment to find out. He noticed the bruise. She saw him notice it. He said nothing about it. Anna Harper, she said, because she had decided that morning to use her real first name and her mother's maiden name, which was close enough to truth to feel manageable. Mr. Potts at the Mercantile said you might have need of a housekeeper. Dexter Walker had looked at her for a long, considering moment. Behind him, through the open front door, she could hear children, specifically the sound of something being knocked over and the subsequent argument about whose fault it was. "You have experience?" he asked. His voice was measured, neither warm nor cold, a man who chose his words. "I managed a household in Dodge City for 3 years, she said, which was true. "I can cook, clean, sew, tend a kitchen garden, and manage children. I work hard and I don't require much." Something moved across his expression too briefly for her to read. He looked down at the hammer in his hand, then back at her. "My youngest is 4, he said. "She's had a hard time since her mother passed. The older boys are manageable mostly, but Lily needs someone steady." "I understand," Anna said. She did understand. She understood it with the part of herself she was trying very hard not to let be engaged, the part that remembered being small and afraid and needing someone steady who never came. He hired her that afternoon. He showed her the room off the kitchen, a small, clean space with a good iron bed and a window that faced the kitchen garden. He introduced her to Caleb, who was 10 and serious, and Jessie, who was 8 and immediately suspicious of her in the way that only an 8-year-old can be suspicious, all watchful eyes and pointed silences. And he introduced her to Lily, who was sitting on the kitchen floor with a corn-husk doll, and who looked up at Anna with those dark eyes, those eyes exactly like her father's, and said nothing at all. Anna had expected to feel nothing. She was very practiced at feeling nothing when feeling nothing was necessary for survival. She unpacked her carpet bag, she made supper, she kept herself at the exact right professional distance, and she told herself that she was here for the money and the safety and nothing else. She had not accounted for the children. Caleb came to her 3 days in after supper when his father was out checking the fence line, and Jesse was supposedly doing his reading. He stood in the kitchen doorway with a look of such careful casualness that it hurt to see, and he asked her if she knew how to make his mother's apple cake. He described it in precise detail, the way children describe things they are afraid of forgetting, and Anna had made it from his description and watched something in the boy's face go tender and broken and young in a way that children should not have to be. She had given him a large piece and not mentioned the tears he wiped away very quickly on the back of his sleeve. Jesse's resistance lasted a full week. He made it a project finding fault with the way she swept, with the saltiness of the stew, with the fact that she folded the napkins the wrong way. Anna bore it without argument because she understood what it was. It was grief wearing armor, and she had enough experience with that particular thing to know that you did not fight it, you simply waited. On the 8th day, Jesse came to her with a book, a natural history volume with illustrated plates of animals, and asked her if she knew what a pronghorn antelope was, and they sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours with that book between them, and that was that. And then there was Lily. Lily Walker did not speak much to begin with. She followed Anna around the house at a distance of approximately 4 feet, close enough to observe, far enough to retreat. She watched everything Anna did with those grave, dark eyes. She brought her things, a pebble she found interesting, a button from some previous life of the household, a small cluster of dried wildflowers. Anna accepted each offering with the same seriousness with which it was given, and she placed each small treasure on the windowsill above the kitchen sink and did not move them. On the 5th day, Lily climbed into the chair beside Anna while she was mending and leaned against her arm without a word. Anna had sat very still. She had kept her breathing even. And she had told herself with great urgency that this was not hers to keep. This was temporary. She was temporary. She was a woman passing through, using this place as shelter while she figured out her next move. And the moment she let herself believe otherwise was the moment she became someone these children would have to lose. But the days had continued anyway, one after another, in the particular relentless way that days do. And Anna had cooked and cleaned and mended and managed. And Lily had graduated from leaning against her arm to sitting in her lap. And Jessie had stopped looking for things to criticize and started bringing her interesting rocks from the creek. And Caleb had started saving her the pieces of the newspaper that came through town when it had stories he thought she might find interesting. And the house had begun to feel, against every intention Anna had, like something she recognized. She had tried very hard not to notice Dexter Walker. She had largely failed. He was a quiet man in the truest sense of the word, not the quietness of emptiness, but the quietness of someone who had learned that words were most valuable when they mattered. He worked from before dawn until long after the children were in bed, the way a man works when he is trying to outrun something, and Anna recognized that particular motion because she had her own version of it. He was always courteous to her, almost formal, careful of a distance that she appreciated for reasons she did not examine too closely. But there were things she noticed despite herself. The way he always checked the children were settled before he sat down to his own supper. The way he read to Lily every night, even when he was clearly exhausted, even when his voice went rough from tiredness, because Lily had asked him and he could not refuse her. The way he fixed the latch on Anna's window the day after she mentioned, only in passing and only to herself, that it did not quite close properly, yet somehow he had heard. The way he looked at the land, his land, with the particular expression of a man who understands that something valuable requires tending every single day, not just when it is convenient. She noticed, also, the way he did not look at the photograph of Elizabeth Walker that sat on the mantelpiece. Or rather, the way he looked at it when he thought no one was watching, with something in his face so private and so painful that Anna always looked away immediately, because some grief was not meant to be witnessed by strangers. She told herself she was a stranger. She told herself that every day. On the 14th day, she had been in the kitchen before dawn. unable to sleep, going over her accounts in her mind for the 100th time. She had been paid her first week's wage, which was fair and exactly what Mr. Potts had suggested, and she was calculating how many more weeks she needed before she had enough for the journey west and some left over to start fresh somewhere. She had been so deep in her arithmetic in the particular focus of a woman planning her escape that she had not heard him come in. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her at the kitchen table, and they were both quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not uncomfortable but is perhaps more honest than either of them intended. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No," she said. He nodded as if this was sufficient and drank his coffee and did not ask any more questions. She found herself exhaling in a way she had not expected. "Your boys are good children," she said, because she meant it, and because the silence had become something she felt the need to say something genuine into. "Caleb especially, he's carrying a lot." Something shifted in Dexter's face. "He is," he agreed. "He's been trying to be the man of the house since Elizabeth died. I keep telling him he's 10 years old. He keeps not believing me." "He made his mother's apple cake recipe happen," Anna said. "He described it to me from memory, every ingredient, every step. It was the most precise recipe I've ever received." Dexter was quiet for a moment. Then something crossed his face that she realized with a slight shock was the beginning of a smile. He watched Elizabeth make that cake 100 times. She always let him lick the spoon. They sat in the quiet kitchen in the pre-dawn dark, and Anna was aware of something dangerous happening, something she had been very carefully preventing, which was the feeling of being in a place where she was known. Not for what she had been through, not for the bruise that had faded but whose ghost she still touched sometimes when she thought no one was looking, but simply known, seen, in a way that did not require her to explain herself. She had gone back to bed and lain awake for a long time after that, adding up her money and telling herself firmly that she had a plan. On the 17th day, a rider had come into town with a notice from the Barton County Sheriff's Office, posted at the Mercantile and at the post office and at the saloon. Anna had not seen it herself. She had heard about it from Jesse, who had been in town with his father and came home with wide eyes and told her that there was a notice about a missing woman from Dodge City, a Mrs. Gerald Whitmore, whose husband was very worried about her safety and seeking any information about her whereabouts. Anna had gone very still at the kitchen sink. Jesse had looked at her with his bright 8-year-old eyes and said, "She must have run off somewhere exciting. Do you think she's a desperado?" "I think," Anna had said carefully, her hands gripping the edge of the sink, "that she is probably just a person trying to find somewhere safe." She had made her decision that night. She had to leave. She had enough money for the stage to San Antonio, and from there she could figure out the rest. She would leave in the morning early before the household woke, and she would leave a note with her wages on the kitchen table, and she would not let herself think about Caleb's serious eyes or Jesse's rocks or Lily's small warm weight against her side. She had packed her carpet bag. She had written the note. She had set the wages on the table. And then the following evening had come, the evening of the 3rd week, and Dexter had said at supper that he thought they might have evening prayers together tonight, as Elizabeth had always done on Fridays, and he had looked briefly uncertain as he said it, like a man trying to remember the shape of something good. And the children had brightened, all 3 of them, in that particular way that children brighten when they are given back a piece of something they thought was gone. And Anna had told herself that she could stay for prayers and then leave after, once everyone was asleep, because leaving during prayers would have been something even her battered sense of what was right could not manage. So she had stayed. She had helped with the supper and she had washed the dishes and she had watched Lily's hair and braided it for her, because Lily had brought her the brush with the kind of quiet trust that rendered argument impossible. And all the while Anna had been telling herself that this was the last time. These were the last dishes. This was the last braid. She had said her private goodbyes to every corner of the kitchen, to the herbs she had started in pots on the windowsill, to the latch on the pantry door she had been meaning to mention to Dexter, to the view of the live oaks through the kitchen window that she had found herself standing in front of during quiet moments. When the supper things were done and Dexter had gathered the children in the front room and opened the Bible on the side table, and the soft orange light of the evening had come through the windows and the boys had gone to kneel by the settee, Anna had picked up her carpet bag from beside her bedroom door. She had it in her hand. She had taken one step toward the front door. And Lily had looked up from where she was settling beside her brothers, and she had crossed the room in 4 small, decisive steps, and she had taken Anna's hand in both of hers, and she had looked up with those dark, serious eyes, and she had said very quietly, "Stay." Just that single word, "Stay." Anna could not move. The carpetbag hung from her other hand. Dexter had turned at the sound of his daughter's voice, and he was looking at Anna now, at the bag in her hand, and there was something moving across his face that was not quite accusation and not quite confusion, but was somewhere between them, and somewhere beneath them, something more private and more difficult. Anna stood there with Lily's hands wrapped around hers, and felt the entire architecture of her careful plan come apart. "I have to go," she said, and her voice did not sound like hers. It sounded like the voice of someone who did not fully believe what they were saying. "No," Lily said, simply. The absolute certainty of a 4-year-old who has decided something. Caleb and Jesse were both looking at her now. Caleb's face had gone very still in that way he had, the way of a boy who has already learned too much about people leaving. Jesse looked between his sister and Anna with an expression of someone doing fast internal mathematics. Dexter Walker set the Bible down on the side table. "Children," he said, in a voice that was quiet and even, "give us a moment." They went, with the particular reluctant obedience of children who knew that obedience was required, but wanted it registered that they did not like it. Lily released Anna's hand with the deliberateness of someone making a statement, and she went after her brothers, and she looked back once from the doorway. Dexter and Anna stood in the front room in the orange evening light. "You're leaving," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at the carpetbag. He looked at her face. He had the stillness of a man who is managing several strong feelings at once and has had a lot of practice doing so. "Is someone in trouble?" he asked. "Or are you?" The question was so direct, so quietly intelligent, that Anna felt something give way in her chest that she had been holding rigid for 3 weeks. She looked at the floor. She looked at the open Bible on the side table. She looked at the photograph of Elizabeth Walker on the mantelpiece, this woman who had built this house and loved these children and then left them in the cruelest way there is, through no fault of her own. "There is a notice," she said, "in town. A missing woman from Dodge City." Silence. "I see," he said. "The name on the notice is Whitmore," she said, because she owed him that. "My husband's name. I left him 8 months ago. He has a brother who wears a badge and he has money, and if anyone in this town connects me to that notice, they will send me back. And I cannot go back. I will not go back." She had not planned to say any of that. She had planned to simply leave. Dexter Walker was quiet for a long time. The evening sounds came through the walls, the distant cattle, the horses in the near pasture, the wind through the live oaks. When he spoke, his voice was level and careful, and something underneath it that she would need more time to identify. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. The question surprised her into honesty. "No," she said. "Then sit down," he said. "Please. We can still have prayers, and then we can talk about what's going to happen next." She had not expected that. She looked at the carpetbag in her hand. She looked at the door. She looked at the man standing in the orange light with his Bible on the table and 3 children somewhere down the hall, 3 children who had each in their own way made a place for her. She set the carpetbag down. She did not leave that night. The conversation that followed prayers was careful on both their parts, conducted after the children were in bed, at the kitchen table with coffee between them like something neutral and necessary. Anna told him enough. Not everything, but enough. She told him about Gerald Whitmore's hands, and the 3 years of the particular kind of darkness that nobody talks about in polite company. because polite company finds it uncomfortable. She told him about the night she left. She told him about the zigzag across the territory. She did not cry because she had decided some time ago that she was done crying over Gerald Whitmore, but there were moments when her voice went flat and thin, which was its own kind of telling. Dexter listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer the particular kind of platitudes that men sometimes offered because they did not know what else to do with the discomfort of women's pain. He just listened, and when she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "No one will send you back." She looked at him. "You can't promise that." "I can promise that whatever I'm able to do to prevent it, I will do," he said. "That notice is general. If anyone asks me, you are Anna Harper, my housekeeper, and she is not anyone named Whitmore." "That could put you in a difficult position with the law," she said. "Gerald's brother is a lawman." "A Barton County lawman has no authority in this county," Dexter said. "And I know the sheriff here. He's a fair man." He paused. "You're safe here, Anna. That's not nothing." She had looked at him for a long moment, this careful, steady man who had just offered her something she had not known how to ask for. Safe. It was such a small word and such an enormous thing. "Why?" she asked. He looked at the coffee cup in his hands. He looked at the kitchen around him, at the herbs in the pots on the windowsill that she had started, at the braided rug she had found in a trunk in the back room and beaten clean and laid by the stove. He looked at her. "Because Lily couldn't let go of your hand," he said simply. "And because I've been watching you for 3 weeks, and I think you're one of the most capable and decent people I've ever had in this house, and I don't want you to leave." The last part had come out with a slight roughness that he seemed to become aware of, because he looked back at his coffee cup immediately after. Anna was very quiet for a moment. "I have no intention of becoming a burden to this household," she said carefully. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're the reason my children ate something other than my badly cooked beans for 3 weeks, and you're the reason Caleb smiled last week for the first time since March." She had gone to bed that night with her carpetbag still packed and sitting in the corner of her room, because she was not ready to fully surrender the idea of leaving, which felt, in some way she could not entirely explain, like the last thing that was entirely her own decision. But in the morning she had unpacked it. November came to Coldwater Creek in a slow, golden wash that softened the edges of the land and put color into the creek-bottom trees, and the Walker Ranch settled into a rhythm that felt, to Anna's careful and perpetually watchful mind, like something fragile and precious. She told herself she was staying because it was practical. She told herself it every morning with great conviction, and was generally successful at believing it until approximately the moment Dexter Walker appeared in the kitchen doorway. The trouble was that she had stopped being afraid of him somewhere around the end of October, and without fear as a buffer, she was left with something else entirely. She began to notice things that she had been successfully not noticing before. The way he moved through the house with a quiet consideration for the people in it, setting things down without banging them, closing doors softly, the habits of a man who had learned to be careful of his own size in the presence of children and animals and grief. The way he was with the cattle, patient and competent in the particular way that spoke not of natural talent, but of years of hard-won knowledge. The way he talked to Caleb about the cattle operation with the respect of one person informing another, not simply ordering, which Caleb received with a gravity that was endearing and a little heartbreaking in equal measure. She noticed that he read. There were books on the shelf in the front room that were not just the Bible and the almanac that she might have expected, but proper books, a history of the frontier, some novels that looked well read, a collection of maps. She noticed that he noticed things, small things, the way a hawk noticed movement in a field, but without predation, with something more like attention. One evening she had mentioned, just in passing conversation with Jessie, that she had read somewhere that the stars they saw in the summer were different from the ones in winter, and the following week Dexter had come in from the evening check of the cattle and set a book about astronomy on the kitchen table beside her without comment. She had looked at it for a long time before she opened it. The days were shortening rapidly now, the November dark coming early, and evenings had become a territory she had to navigate with great care, because evenings meant the household gathered and gathered meant proximity, and proximity to Dexter Walker had become something she was finding increasingly difficult to manage with her former composure. He sat across from her at the table. He sometimes sat near her by the fire in the front room when the children were in bed. He talked to her carefully, the way a person talks when they are interested in the other person's thoughts and are not entirely sure of their welcome, and she talked back carefully for the same reasons. Jesse brought her the first frost of November on his boot soles and the bright, triumphant face of a child who has been proved right about something he predicted, because he had predicted the frost 3 days before it came. She had congratulated him with genuine warmth and felt Dexter watching her from across the room with an expression she was learning to recognize. That particular quality of attention that was, she was increasingly certain, not entirely professional. She had a night in the second week of November when she lay awake for a long time and had a very stern conversation with herself about the nature of her situation. She was a woman hiding from her legal husband. She was using a name that was not entirely her own. She had no standing in this territory that was not dependent on the goodwill of a man who knew the truth of her, and relying on a man's goodwill was something she had learned to be exceptionally careful about. She told herself all of this with the clarity of someone who has spent 3 years learning what happens when you trust the wrong things. None of it helped as much as she needed it to. Caleb was the first one to say anything, which she should have expected because Caleb was 10 years old and therefore omniscient in the way that 10-year-olds are. He said it sideways, the way children say things they have been thinking about for a long time, which is the most dangerous kind of saying. She was teaching him his arithmetic at the kitchen table, and he had looked up from his slate and said, entirely without preamble, "My father looks different when you're in the room." Anna had kept her eyes on the slate. Different how? "Like he's awake," Caleb said, and then went back to his arithmetic with the complete unconcern of someone who has said what they needed to say. She had very carefully not responded to that, but she thought about it for the rest of the week. The incident that changed things happened on a Saturday in the middle of November, when Dexter rode into town for supplies and came back with the news that the Barton County Sheriff's deputy had been in Coldwater Creek asking questions. Not about any missing woman specifically, or so he had been told, but asking around in a general way that had a specific feeling to it. He told her this in the kitchen in a low voice with the children safely out of earshot, and he watched her face while he told her because he was paying attention. She felt the cold go through her. Gerald had not let go. She had known he wouldn't. Men like Gerald did not let go, not because they missed her, but because she was something he had owned and she had taken herself back, and that was the kind of insult that men like Gerald could not absorb. "He's persistent," she said, her voice flat. "I told the deputy I didn't know anyone matching the description he gave," Dexter said. "He seemed to accept it." She looked at him. "You lied for me." "I told the narrowest possible version of the truth," he said. He described a Mrs. Gerald Whitmore. "I have never employed anyone by that name." A pause. "Which is accurate." She felt something in her chest that was dangerous and warm, and that she told herself was gratitude. It was, in fact, gratitude, but it was also something else. "This could get complicated for you," she said. "If Gerald sends his brother himself, or if anyone in town who's seen the notice looks too closely." "It could," he agreed. He leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, and he looked at her with that direct, steady look that she had come to understand was just how he looked, not an attempt to intimidate, simply a man who looked at things honestly. "But I find I'm not particularly interested in complicated as a reason for you to leave." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, she could hear Jesse and Caleb arguing about something near the barn, and further off, Lily's high voice saying something to the yard cat she had adopted. "Dexter," she said, and then stopped because she was not entirely sure what she intended to say next. "I know," he said, very quietly. "I know it's not simple. I know you're still figuring out your next steps. I'm not asking you to make any decisions." A pause. "I'm just telling you that as far as I'm concerned, you have a place here. For as long as you want one." She had looked at him for a long, still moment, and she had felt something she had not felt in longer than she could clearly remember, which was the sensation of being seen by someone who was not looking at her with ownership or obligation, or the particular hunger that is about the self rather than the other person. He was just looking at her. Just Dexter, with the November light behind him and the sounds of his children outside, and the weight of everything they had each been carrying separately. "Thank you," she said finally. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough, but it was what she had. He nodded. He pushed off the counter and went back to his work, because he always went back to his work, and Anna stood in the kitchen for a moment after he was gone and pressed her hand flat against the kitchen table and breathed. The third week of November brought cold, the real cold that meant winter was not a theory anymore but an actual condition requiring active response. Anna turned the kitchen garden over for the season and put up the last of the preserves, and made sure the root cellar was properly stocked, and she moved through these tasks with a satisfying efficiency that she recognized as something she had not felt in Gerald's house, where efficiency had been demanded rather than offered. Here it felt like her own choice. She was in the root cellar one morning taking inventory when she heard Lily's voice above her, agitated in a way that was unusual enough to make her climb the ladder immediately. Lily was in the kitchen yard, pointing at something by the fence, her small face tight with distress. "There's a hurt bird," Lily said when she saw Anna. "It can't fly." It was a meadowlark, one wing held wrong, sitting in the frost-browned grass near the fence post with the particular stillness of an animal that has decided not to fight anymore. Anna crouched down beside it and looked at it carefully and decided that the wing was not broken, probably bruised from some collision, and that the bird needed warmth and quiet rather than anything more dramatic. She and Lily spent the afternoon constructing a small shelter in the corner of the kitchen from a box and some straw and scraps of muslin, and they put the bird in it, and Lily sat beside it with focused attention that was so completely her father's way of attending to things that Anna had to look away for a moment. Dexter came in from the fields to find his youngest daughter presiding over a meadowlark convalescence with the authority of a small field surgeon, and he looked at Anna with an expression that did things to her composure that she was no longer even pretending to control. "It will probably be able to fly in a few days," Anna said, "if it's only bruised." "Lily's been in here all afternoon," he said. "She's been an excellent nurse," Anna said. "Very attentive and very quiet, which is exactly what the bird needs." Lily looked up from the box. "Anna says you have to be steady," she said, "so it knows you're safe." Something moved across Dexter's face that was private and complicated, and that Anna witnessed in the moment before she looked down at the bird. The bird recovered in 3 days, as she had thought it would. They released it from the kitchen yard on a bright cold morning, and it sat on the fence post for a long moment as if orienting itself, and then it flew in a wide, easy arc over the live oaks and was gone. Lily watched it go with no visible distress, with rather the satisfied expression of someone who has done what they set out to do. "You'll see other ones like it," Anna told her. "In the spring, especially." "I know," Lily said with utter confidence, and then went to find the yard cat. Dexter was standing a few feet away, watching his daughter walk back to the barn with her small purposeful steps, and when he turned to look at Anna there was something in his expression that was no longer private. It was not hidden at all. "I need to say something," he said. "You don't have to," she said quickly, because she was afraid of what he was going to say and she was afraid of how much she wanted to hear it. "Anna," just her name. The way he said it was different from how he had said it before. Something underneath it now that had been building for weeks, and that she had been watching grow with the terrified awe of someone watching a fire catch. I am aware that your situation is complicated. I am aware that I am a widower with 3 children and a ranch that requires everything I have, and that you have things to resolve that have nothing to do with me. I'm not asking you to resolve anything today." He stopped. He seemed to be arranging something very carefully. "I just want you to know that I have feelings for you that have become impossible to ignore, and that I thought you deserved to know that, whatever you decide to do with it." She was quiet for a long moment. The cold air was very clear. The live oaks moved in a slow wind. "I have been very specifically trying not to feel the same way," she said. "I haven't been successful." He looked at her, that particular complete attention. "What do we do with that?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Gerald is still out there. I'm still legally his wife. I don't know what that means for me, for you, for any of this." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything to be resolved tonight. I just needed you to know." She looked at him in the cold, bright morning. This man who had told Gerald Whitmore's deputy that he had never employed anyone named Whitmore, who had fixed her window latch without being asked, who read to his daughter every night when his voice had gone rough, who had sat with her in the pre-dawn kitchen and listened, who had told her she was safe here as if safety were something he had the right to offer and had decided to exercise it. "I know," she said. And then, because it was true and because he had been honest and so she could be, "Thank you for telling me." They went back inside and nothing was resolved and everything was different. December came in cold and determined, and with it came the particular intimacy of a household preparing for winter, the banking of fires and the pulling of shutters, and the making of preserves that had been neglected, and the mending of what needed mending before the worst of the cold. Anna found herself working alongside Dexter more often now, because many of these preparations required more than one pair of hands, and the doing of practical things beside someone, the passing of tools and the holding of things steady, and the small negotiations of physical proximity in shared work, was its own kind of language. She was teaching Jesse to read better, and Caleb to keep the ranch accounts in a proper ledger, and Lily letters and numbers, which Lily approached with the methodical intensity she brought to everything. In the evenings now, after prayers, they sometimes all sat in the front room together, Dexter with his reading, the boys with theirs, Lily with the cornhusk doll that had been given, Anna had come to understand, a new status as companion to the meadowlark's empty box, and Anna mending or reading or sometimes just sitting in the warmth of the fire. And she thought that she had not sat anywhere like this, in this particular ease that was not absence of danger but was presence of something steady, in so long that she was not entirely sure she had ever sat anywhere like this. 3 days before Christmas, a letter came to the Coldwater Creek post office addressed to Dexter Walker. She knew about it because Dexter told her, which was itself significant, sitting down across from her at the kitchen table and laying the envelope between them and looking at it with an expression she could not immediately read. "It's from a lawyer in Dodge City," he said. "A Mr. Farwell." He met her eyes. "Gerald Whitmore died on the 14th of November. Heart failure, it says. Natural causes." The kitchen was very still. Anna felt the news come into her the way cold air comes into a room when a door is opened, all at once and everywhere. Gerald Whitmore was dead. He had been dead for over a month. The deputy in Coldwater Creek had been acting on old instructions, or perhaps his own initiative, or perhaps Gerald's brother had not yet been informed, or perhaps had been informed and had sent him anyway out of some impulse of his own. It didn't matter now. She was free. The word had a quality she had not expected, a kind of weight, as if freedom were not nothing but something large and shapeless and requiring time to understand. "The lawyer," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Why is he writing to you?" "He's not specifically," Dexter said. The letter was sent to several parties in towns along the stage lines that Whitmore's investigators had identified as possible locations. "It's a notification that the search has ended. The estate is being settled." He paused. "There is apparently a small provision for his widow should she come forward." Anna looked at the envelope. She thought about Gerald. She thought about 3 years and about rain and running and about $11.40 and a bruise along her jaw. She thought about the deputy in Coldwater Creek and the notice at the mercantile. "I don't want anything from his estate," she said. "I didn't think you would," Dexter said, "but I thought you should know." She looked up at him. He was watching her with that careful, honest attention, letting her have whatever she needed to have. She thought about the conversation in the kitchen yard in the cold November light, about what he had said and what she had said, about the life that had opened up in front of her like a question she now had the room to consider. "I'm free," she said, trying the word out. "You are," he said. She looked at the lamp between them on the kitchen table. She looked at the herbs on the windowsill. She looked at Dexter Walker across the table, this man who had given her safety when she had nothing left to offer except her work and her damaged and resilient self. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said in November." He was very still. "I've been thinking about it since you said it," she continued, "and I would have kept thinking about it and done nothing because my situation was impossible, but it's not impossible anymore." She stopped. She was not entirely sure how to do this because she had almost no experience with things that were allowed. "I would like to know," she said, "if you mean what you said." "I meant every word," he said. Very quietly, very directly. "I've never had something that was mine to choose," she said. "I need you to understand that, not as an excuse but so you know what you're asking. If we do this, I need it to be because I'm choosing it. Not because I'm grateful, not because I have nowhere else to go, because I want to." "I wouldn't want it any other way," he said, steady, sure. "Then I choose it," she said. "I choose you, and those extraordinary, complicated children of yours." Something happened in his face that she had never seen there before, something that moved through all that careful composure and left something else behind, something open and real and quietly, deeply glad. He reached across the kitchen table and put his hand over hers, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they sat there in the December lamplight with the cold outside, and the fire in the stove, and the particular warmth of a thing that is finally, honestly true. Christmas that year was something Anna had not expected to experience with this particular quality of feeling. She made the apple cake again, Caleb's mother's recipe, and this time when she brought it to the table Dexter looked at it, and then at her with an expression that was tender and complicated and grateful in a way she understood without needing it explained. Jesse hung a paper star he had made himself on the small cedar tree that Dexter and the boys had brought in from the pasture edge, and set in the front room. Lily put her corn-husk doll in a place of honor beside the tree, with the absolute conviction that the doll was having a very good Christmas. They sat around the tree in the evening, and Dexter read from the Bible, and the children were fed and warm, and the house smelled of cake and cedar. And Anna sat beside the fire with Lily against her side, and felt something she was going to have to allow herself to call happiness, because denying it at this point would be dishonest. In January, Dexter spoke to the local minister, a Reverend Marsh, who was a practical and kind man, about the situation in its fullness, the widow's situation confirmed by the lawyer's letter, the question of what was appropriate, what was right. Reverend Marsh, who had known Dexter Walker for 8 years and had buried Elizabeth Walker with this community's grief, told him that a man who had raised 3 children alone for 8 months on a cattle ranch had earned the right to be happy, and that if Anna Harper was the woman he had chosen, and she had chosen him in return, then there was no theological or practical obstacle he could identify, provided they were of a mind to do it properly. They were of a mind to do it properly. They married on the 15th of January, 1883, in the Coldwater Creek church, with Reverend Marsh officiating and the 3 Walker children in the front pew, Caleb serious and contained, and something bright in his eyes that he was managing with dignity, Jesse with his chin up, and an expression of someone who has decided to be pleased about a thing, Lily in a new calico dress that Anna had made for her in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Sitting with her hands folded in her lap and watching her father and Anna with a gravity so complete that Mrs. Caldwell from the boarding house, seated 2 rows back, was seen to press her handkerchief to her eyes. They spoke their vows in plain and honest words, and when Anna said "I do," she meant it with every part of herself, the broken parts and the mended ones, and the parts that were still in the process of deciding what they were. And she felt Dexter's hand steady around hers, and knew that he was exactly who he appeared to be, which was something she had not known she could have. The children were waiting at the church door when they came out, and Lily threw herself at Anna with both arms and held on in the way she had on that first evening before prayers, except this time there was nothing of departure in it, nothing of keeping, only the simple and absolute claim of a child who has decided that a thing is hers and is right about that. Anna held her. She held her for a long time. The winter settled in properly after that, and Anna Walker settled into her life with the same careful thoroughness with which she had done everything, except that now the carefulness was not for protection but for tending, which was an entirely different thing. She was no longer watching for exits. She was watching for what each day needed. She and Dexter moved through the cold months with the particular closeness of 2 people learning each other honestly. There were things that needed to be unlearned on her part, the reflexive flinching from raised voices, though Dexter's voice very rarely rose, the habit of waiting to be told before she spoke her opinion, the old fear that wanting something was the same as making a target of herself. Dexter learned her signals without requiring her to explain all of them, because he paid attention, and because he was, at his core, a man who believed that understanding the people he loved was more important than having them conform to his expectations. He was careful with her in ways that were at first foreign and gradually became something she could receive without turning away. When she flinched at something, he did not press her about it. When she was quiet in the particular way that meant she was managing something old and difficult, he brought her coffee and sat nearby without demanding that she share. She was learning that safety was not merely the absence of harm. It was the presence of someone who saw you and stayed. February brought the first genuinely warm days, brief and fragrant, the hint of spring in the air before winter reasserted itself. And with them came a letter from Anna's cousin in El Paso, who had heard something through the complicated web of women's correspondence that crossed the territories, that Anna was alive and well and married and in Coldwater Creek. The letter was warm and slightly amazed and said that she was glad, and Anna wrote back and said she was glad too. Caleb turned 11 in February. They gave him his father's old Bowie knife, in its original leather sheath, with the Walker name stamped in the leather, and Caleb received it with both hands and looked at it for a long moment, and then looked up at his father and then at Anna with something so direct and undefended in his face that it was almost impossible to look at. He said thank you, very formally, to both of them together, as if he had decided that they constituted a single thing now, and the thanks should be distributed accordingly. Jessie wrote a story, for the first time, because Anna had been encouraging this. It was a story about a meadowlark that was also secretly a scout for the birds of the whole county, flying further than any other bird to report back on conditions across the land. It was, in Anna's honest assessment, a very good story for an 8-year-old, and she told him so without qualifications, which caused him to go very red and subsequently deny caring about her opinion, and subsequently produce another story the following week. Lily turned 5 in April, and the spring came in properly around her birthday with wildflowers along the creek and the cattle back on the spring pasture, and the kitchen garden coming up in the particular green of very early growth that Anna found unreasonably cheerful every single morning when she looked at it through the kitchen window. It was Lily's birthday supper, after the cake and the small gifts and the children finally in bed, that Anna told Dexter what she had known for 3 weeks with increasing certainty. They were in the kitchen in the lamplight, and she had been trying to find the right moment all day and had not found a right moment, so she simply said it. "I'm expecting," she said. Dexter Walker put down the cup he was holding. He looked at her. The lamplight was gold on his face, and there was something in his expression that was so enormous and so plain that she felt it like a hand pressed to her heart. "Are you certain?" he asked, and his voice was rough. "As certain as a woman can be at this stage," she said. "Probably September." He stood up and came around the table, and she stood up to meet him, and he put his arms around her and held her with the particular care of a man who is very aware of what he is holding. And she pressed her face against his neck and felt his arms around her and felt the warmth of this thing, this enormous, simple, good thing, fill her up from the inside. "A baby," he said, against her hair. "A baby," she agreed. She could feel him exhale, long and slow and shaking slightly. And she knew it was not just the news of the baby, but everything that the baby meant, which was that this was real, that they had made something together, that the life he had been rebuilding from the ruins of grief, and she had been rebuilding from the ruins of fear, had arrived at something new that belonged only to them. The summer that followed was the fullest summer Anna had experienced in the whole of her life. The ranch was busy in the way of high summer on a cattle operation, with Dexter and the ranch hands he employed seasonally working from before dawn, and Anna managing the house and the children and the kitchen garden with a body that was changing in ways she was learning to be patient with. Jesse became, during this summer, her self-appointed assistant in the kitchen garden, because he had become intensely interested in the science of what grew where and why, and they had long conversations over the bean rows about soil and season, and what the natural history book said about the varieties of plants that had been cultivated by the indigenous peoples of the region before the settlers came. Conversations that Dexter sometimes appeared at the edge of, and listened to with the expression of a man who is enjoying something very much. Caleb had been given more responsibility with the cattle operation this summer, working alongside Dexter in a way that was clearly deliberate preparation, not for burden but for belonging. Anna watched this between them sometimes, the father and the nearly grown boy moving through the ranch work together, and thought that there was very little she had ever seen that was more purely right than Dexter Walker teaching his oldest son the land that would one day be his. She wrote to her cousin in El Paso in July and told her about the baby, and her cousin wrote back with practical advice about the heat and the wisdom of finding a good midwife, which Anna had already done, a woman named Mrs. Torres, who had delivered most of the babies in Coldwater Creek for 15 years and who had, on her first visit, looked Anna over with brisk professional thoroughness and told her that everything was entirely as it should be, which Anna had received as the best possible news. There was one evening in late August when Anna could not sleep, which was not unusual at 8 months along, and she had gone to sit on the porch in the warm night air with a shawl around her shoulders. Dexter came out after her, because he always knew when she was not in the room, and he sat beside her on the porch steps, and they looked at the stars over the live oaks in the warm Texas dark. "Lily asked me today if the baby would be a boy or a girl," she said. "What did you tell her?" "That we would find out when it arrived, and that either way the baby was lucky to have her as an older sister." He was quiet for a moment, in the companionable way she had come to love. "What did she say to that?" "She said she knew," Anna said, in that exact tone she uses when she feels a fact has been unnecessarily stated. He laughed, the real laugh that she treasured, the one that came from somewhere unguarded. She leaned against him in the warm night and felt the baby move and felt the stars above the live oaks and felt the porch boards under her and the shawl around her shoulders and the solid warmth of Dexter beside her and thought, very quietly and very deliberately, this is it. This is what it was supposed to feel like. The baby came on a Wednesday evening in the first week of September, when the summer heat had begun at last to moderate into something more bearable. Mrs. Torres was calm and efficient and entirely in charge, and Dexter sat outside the bedroom door for 3 hours in the particular, still agony of a man who has been required to be patient and is not finding it easy. The children were in the front room, where Caleb was reading to Jesse and Lily with a steadiness that told Anna, through the door, more about her stepson's character than she needed any other evidence to confirm. The baby was a boy. He was dark-haired like his father and Lily, and he was, in Mrs. Torr's professional opinion, exactly as he should be, healthy and strong and possessed of a very adequate voice with which to express his views about the world. They named him William Thomas Walker, and Dexter held him in the kitchen doorway while the children crowded around with the particular intensity of siblings meeting a new member of their number. And Lily touched the baby's hand with one careful finger and looked up at Anna with such profound and satisfied approval that Anna felt her eyes fill. "He's the right one," Lily announced, with the authority she always brought to her pronouncements. "He is," Anna agreed. Caleb stood a little back, holding himself with the 11-year-old's dignity he had been cultivating, but his eyes were entirely undone, soft and young, and open in a way that he had not fully let them be since Elizabeth Walker died. He looked at the baby, and he looked at his father, and he looked at Anna, and he said, in a voice that was very controlled, "He has Dad's nose." "He does," Anna said, "and I consider that a very good start." Jesse immediately decided that the baby's primary educational development was his personal responsibility and began, from that first week, the project of teaching William Thomas Walker everything that could be known, starting with the constellations and progressing rapidly into the natural history of the region, which William Thomas Walker received at first with the focused attention of a very new person, encountering the world, and later with the specific delight of a child who has been given an excellent older brother. The autumn settled around the Walker Ranch with the gold and copper of the live oaks, and the late-season warmth on the porch in the mornings, and the kitchen full of the smell of preserves, and the apple cake that had become a permanent fixture of the household in the way that the best things become permanent, through love and repetition. Dexter rode the fence lines and managed the cattle and sat in the evenings with Anna and their son, and the 3 children who had been his before they were hers and now were simply theirs, in the way that good things become shared. On an evening in October, exactly 1 year after Anna Harper had arrived in Coldwater Creek with $11.40 and a fading bruise and a plan to disappear, she was standing at the kitchen window watching the live oaks in the last of the October light, gold and absolute, and Dexter came up behind her and put his arms around her, and she leaned back into him, and they stood there together, watching the light move through the trees. "You almost left," he said, not accusingly, just remembering. "I almost left," she agreed. "I'm glad Lily has strong opinions," he said. She laughed and felt him laugh against her shoulder. The baby was asleep in the cradle in the corner. Through the wall she could hear the boys' voices, Jesse explaining something at length and Caleb responding in the measured way he had that made him sound 40 years old, and somewhere Lily's voice singing a small private song that she had been singing for weeks and that had no discernible words but had a distinct and persistent melody. "So am I," Anna said. "I am very glad of that." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she closed her eyes against the warmth of it. She thought about the woman who had stepped off the stage in Coldwater Creek 12 months ago, calculating escape routes and counting money, and holding herself apart from everything warm because everything warm had been a trap in her experience, because kindness had worn Gerald's face for exactly as long as it served him. She thought about how long it had taken her to understand that not all steadiness was strategy, that some people were simply what they appeared to be, that some houses were simply homes. She thought about Lily's hand around her wrist and the single word, "stay," spoken with the unqualified certainty of a child who has recognized something true. She had stayed. She had chosen it. And every morning since that choice, she had found that it was still the right one, not because it was easy or perfect or free of the ordinary difficulties that make up the texture of a life, but because it was real and it was hers, and it was built on ground that held. The following spring brought another child, which was a surprise that arrived with the particular swift certainty of these things, and Mrs. Torrs came back in the May heat and delivered them a daughter, which Lily received with an almost proprietary delight that caused Jessie to point out, reasonably, that Lily had not been consulted in the matter and should perhaps moderate her claim of credit. Lily gave this observation the weight it deserved, which was none, and went back to sitting beside the cradle explaining important things to her new sister in a low and serious voice. They named her Ruth Elizabeth Walker, Elizabeth for the woman who had loved these children first, and who deserved to be remembered in the name of something new and good. Dexter had suggested it, quietly, one evening before the baby came. He had said it with the careful consideration of a man who does not wish to cause pain but believes in doing right, and Anna had looked at him and understood everything he was saying and everything he was not saying, which was that Elizabeth Walker was his past and Anna Walker was his present and his future, and that these things were not in conflict, that loving did not require the erasure of what came before. "I think that's exactly right," Anna had said. Caleb had cried when he heard the name. He had been 12 by then, and he had done it in private, but she had seen his face afterward, which had a quality that she recognized as something released, something laid down that he had been carrying. The ranch grew. The cattle operation that Dexter ran expanded by measured degrees in the spring and summer of 1884, with 2 additional ranch hands employed through the season, and a second pasture taken under cultivation, which Caleb was now involved in planning with a seriousness that made Dexter tell Anna on more than one occasion that the boy was going to be a better cattleman than he ever was. Anna believed it. She had seen Caleb with the ledgers and with the land maps, and with the particular quality of attention he gave to the cattle in the near pasture, watching for the things that needed watching, understanding what he saw. Jesse's stories had become a genuine occupation. He filled notebooks that Anna brought him from the mercantile in Coldwater Creek, natural history observations and stories that were increasingly ambitious, that mixed the scientific with the imagined in a way that was entirely his own. Reverend Marsh, who came for supper occasionally now that the Walker family was a regular presence in his congregation, had told Jesse that he had a gift, and Jesse had received this with an expression of immense composure that he then immediately destroyed by going very pink, which was something Caleb had pointed out, and Jesse had denied with great heat. Lily started school in Coldwater Creek in the fall of 1884, which she approached with the thoroughness she brought to everything. She came home every day with precise reports on what had been learned and what had been inadequately explained by the schoolteacher, whose methods she considered improvable in several respects. Anna listened to these reports with great seriousness and did not laugh, which she considered one of the finest things she did as a parent. One evening in October of that year, 2 years almost to the day since she had arrived in Coldwater Creek on a broken-wheeled stage with a fake name and a plan for disappearing, Anna was sitting with Dexter on the porch in the cool evening, the kind of October evening that smelled of wood smoke and dried grass and the season turning. William was asleep inside and Ruth was asleep, and the older children were finishing their reading by lamplight through the window. "I need to tell you something," Dexter said. She looked at him. In 2 years she had learned to read his pauses, and this one was the kind that meant he had been thinking about something for a while and had decided it was time to say it. "Elizabeth," he said, and then stopped and started again. "For a long time after she died, I thought the hardest thing was going to be the loneliness, managing without her, and it was hard." He was looking at the live oaks in the dark, the shapes of them against the star-filled sky. "But the hardest thing turned out to be believing that I could have something good again, that it wasn't a betrayal wanting that." She was very still. "You taught me that," he said, "not by telling me, by being what you are. Watching you choose to stay, choose us, choose this when you had every reason to keep running, every reason to keep your distance. It showed me that choosing is not betrayal, it's faith." Anna looked at the stars above the live oaks for a moment. "You gave me safety when I had been taught that safety was not something women like me got to have," she said. "You saw me, not what I'd survived, not what I needed, not what I was afraid of, just me, and you stayed." She paused. "That's not nothing either." "No," he said, "it's not nothing." He took her hand in the dark and she leaned against his shoulder, and they sat there in the October night while the stars did what stars do over the Texas land, which is hold their positions with absolute consistency, regardless of what changes below them, and provide a kind of orientation to people who have lost it. She thought about everything that had brought her here. The broken wheel of the stage, the $11, the notice in the mercantile, Lily's hand around her wrist, the single word stay. She thought about Gerald Whitmore, who had tried to own her and had made of his ownership something ugly and secret, and who was dead now in a Dodge City grave. She did not feel victory about that. She felt mostly the particular quiet that comes when something that was held tense for a very long time is allowed at last to release. She felt mostly the porch boards under her and the man beside her and the children through the window and the baby inside asleep in the cradle, and the live oaks against the stars and the kitchen garden that would need turning soon for the season, and the apple cake she was going to make tomorrow because Caleb had asked, and she never said no to that particular request. She felt mostly the life she had stayed for. There were moments in the years that followed, as William grew from a baby to a boy, and Ruth grew from a baby to a girl, and Caleb grew from a boy to a young man, and Jesse filled his notebooks and started sending his stories to a newspaper in San Antonio that actually printed 2 of them. And Lily became the kind of person that Coldwater Creek organized itself around without quite realizing it. There were moments in all of that when Anna would find herself standing in some ordinary corner of her life, the kitchen, the porch, the kitchen garden, the church pew on Sundays with Dexter's arm along the back of the pew behind her, and she would feel the full weight of what she had, not with the anxious grip of someone afraid of losing it, but with the steady, open-handed gratitude of someone who has learned the difference between what is held and what is kept. What is held by force or need or fear, and what is kept by choice, renewed every morning in the ordinary ongoing decision to be here, to tend this, to love these people who are yours. She had made that choice on the evening Lily took her hand before prayers. She had made it in the pre-dawn kitchen with coffee between them. She had made it in the cold November yard. She had made it at the kitchen table when she said, "I choose you." She made it every morning when she stood at the kitchen window and watched the light come through the live oaks onto the kitchen garden and heard the house begin to wake around her. The particular sounds of this life, Dexter's boots on the stairs, the boys' voices, Lily's small song, the baby's first sleepy noises, and chose, as she always chose, to turn from the window and be part of it. In the spring of 1886, Caleb Walker turned 14 and rode out on his own for the first time to the far pasture to check the cattle, and came back with a careful, precise report of what he had found. And Dexter listened to him the way a man listens when he recognizes himself and something finer than himself. And Caleb saw that his father heard him, and something between them settled into a new register that was no longer child and parent but was the beginning of something more equal, more enduring. Jesse got his 3rd story printed in the San Antonio paper that same spring, a natural history piece about the meadowlark of the Texas Hill Country, and Anna read it at the kitchen table and found, somewhere in the precise and affectionate prose, the shape of a boy sitting beside a box with a hurt bird in it, watching with focused patience until the bird was ready to fly, and she had to set the paper down for a moment and look out the window. Lily came home from school that year with a letter from her teacher, saying that she had an aptitude for mathematics that exceeded what the local school could provide, and that the teacher recommended she be considered for the school in Abilene that offered a more advanced curriculum for older students. This was discussed at length at the Walker kitchen table, with all the principals present and expressing views, including Ruth, who was 2, and whose view was largely expressed through the medium of her corn-husk doll, which she held up at several points in the discussion. It was ultimately decided, by the family together, that Lily would attend the school in Abilene, but would come home on the stage for school breaks, which Lily accepted as both reasonable and inevitable. because she was the kind of person for whom the next thing was always interesting. She left in September on the stage from Coldwater Creek, with a new carpetbag that Anna had bought for her at the Mercantile, and she looked out the stage window at her family on the main street of the town she had grown up in, her father and her brothers and Ruth and Anna, and she did not cry because she was Lily Walker and crying was simply not in her repertoire, but her face, through the stage window, was very young and very serious and full of something that did not need a name. Anna raised her hand. Lily raised hers. The stage pulled out into the Texas afternoon. Anna stood on the street of Coldwater Creek, Texas, in the autumn of 1886, with her husband beside her and 3 children around her, and a town that had become hers by choice and love and the long habit of belonging, and felt the particular bittersweet quality of loving someone enough to let them go toward the thing they are meant to do. She understood it. She had run once herself, in a different direction, for different reasons, to different things. She understood that the going was not the end of the love. Dexter put his arm around her shoulders. "She'll be fine," he said. "She'll be extraordinary," Anna said. "She always is." He was quiet for a moment. "You know who she learned it from," he said. She looked up at him in the October light, this man she had chosen and continued to choose, and she felt the full warmth of what he was saying, which was not just a compliment but a recognition, the recognition of a man who had watched her build herself back from nothing and never once made her feel that the building was a burden. She leaned up and kissed him on the cheek in the middle of the main street of Coldwater Creek, which caused Jessie to make a sound of elaborate suffering, and William to ask why people did that, and Ruth to clap her hands with the indiscriminate delight of a 2-year-old who does not yet know she is supposed to find parental affection embarrassing. Caleb, who was 14 and therefore beyond embarrassment, simply smiled. They walked home together through the October afternoon, the Walker family, on the road that led north through the live oaks to the ranch that was theirs, to the house that was full, to the kitchen where the herbs grew on the windowsill and the apple cake was waiting for this evening, to the life that had been built brick by brick from the ruins of fear and grief, by 2 people who had learned, separately and then together, that safety was not the absence of danger but the presence of something steady, and that staying was not the opposite of freedom, but sometimes its fullest expression. The live oaks cast their particular shade across the road as they walked, the same shade that had seemed cooler than it had any right to be on a hot October morning nearly 4 years ago, when a woman with a carpetbag and a battered heart had come up the long drive and found, without knowing it yet, the place she was meant to be. Anna Walker walked home through the shade of those live oaks with her husband's hand in hers and her children around her and her whole life ahead of her, chosen and real and entirely her own, and she was not afraid. She was not afraid at all.